And how do you also send signals to other terror groups, collateral groups, not to perceive us as being vulnerable at this time? So now they're looking to see if they can intercept communication from other suspected groups to make sure that another threat isn't developing from somebody who might have a sense of bravado or a sense that the United States is slightly weaker in this instance. And they're approaching things diplomatically to make sure that, especially at this time when the United States is so associated with Israel in the view of many people on the street in the Arab world, that they communicate to moderate Arab leaders at least that if they do retaliate, this is a targeted retaliation against terror groups. It is not anti-Arab.
So Andrea, is the trail still leading to Osama bin Laden at this point? I know that yesterday, even yesterday afternoon, some high-ranking U.S. officials who were unnamed said they were 90% certain that this was in fact the individual behind this. What is the thinking? Is it, do people feel even stronger about that today?
They do, and Katie, a lot of it is by simple deductive reasoning, that there are no other single players who they think are capable of this, and they have other means, diplomatic and electronic means and human intelligence, to know to their satisfaction so far that this was not some other terror-sponsoring state. They've seen in the patterns of terror that they analyze constantly that this is not something that Iraq would do, not something that Iran would do, clearly not Iran with the movement and direction of Iran. Libya came out and condemned this act of terror, so that's why they're focusing on bin Laden.
All right, NBC's Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, I met 24 hours, 24 years. I made you much older than you really are. Thank you very much. Thanks for that report, Andrea. Anyway, now with more, here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thank you. In 1993, former New York City Police Commissioner Raymond Kelly earned high marks for his handling of the World Trade Center bombing. He's with us now with more insight into how the police will handle yesterday's attack. Ray, good to see you.
See you, Matt.
1993 was a huge bomb that went off in the basement, the garage area of the World Trade Center, and you said to me a second ago, you didn't think anything could bring that building down, much less a plane.
Absolutely. No, this 93 pales in comparison to what happened yesterday. No, the terrorists in 93 tried to topple both buildings, one into the other. Obviously, they didn't succeed, and when they didn't do it at the base, you would think, not being an engineer, that they certainly couldn't do it from that higher level, but obviously, that's not the case.
Immediately following the explosion in 93, police officials, FBI officials set out to find out. They knew it was a bomb, find out where it was placed, who put it together. We know a little bit more about this particular attack. We know that it was done using airplanes, but we still have some questions to be answered. What are police doing right now? What's the game plan for a disaster like this with the New York City Police Department?
Well, obviously, rescue is the primary mission. Police and fire, that's goal one, is to rescue anybody that's still alive there. And you do that until there's absolutely no chance of anybody being alive. On a parallel course, you have an investigation that's ongoing. That'll probably be done primarily by the Joint Terrorist Task Force, headquartered here in New York, FBI, New York City police detectives. That gives it national, indeed, international reach. So I'm sure that's what they're doing. They're looking at the specifics of the hijacking. I'm sure there are people in Maine. We've gotten information in Florida. Obviously, warrants are being executed. So those two efforts are going on simultaneously.
The initial reports, Ray, up to 33 members of the New York City Police Department unaccounted for. You hate to, but you may have to assume the worst there, that they were awfully close to that building when it collapsed. What kind of impact does that have emotionally and logistically on a police force?
Well, it's devastating, no question about it, emotionally. But the people who are missing are primarily members of the emergency service unit, which they're highly skilled, they're very well trained. And of course, in the fire department, it's the same thing. You have the rescue units that are very, very highly trained. The rescue units just cannot be located. Nobody, members of rescue units, can be found. So it's tremendous devastation. But these are the two finest rescue organizations in the world, in my opinion. New York City Police Department and Fire Department. They have a tremendous amount of experience. The Police Department has 40,000 members. The Fire Department has, with the EMS merger, about 15,000 members. So they physically have the resources to do the job.
Yeah, but emotionally, you know, their job is to protect the people of New York City, and what we've seen is that there isn't a police force in the world that can protect and do anything about the vulnerability we've seen in this last 24 hours.
Absolutely. No, this is As far as protection is concerned, this is a federal government responsibility. Municipalities can't do that, and I think we have to take a real hard look at our intelligence gathering capability.
Something else, by the way, you have to keep in mind is that while you're throwing resources, and you have to, down to the World Trade Center area, this is a big city. And life continues in other parts of the city, and you can't pull the police off those streets to put them down at the World Trade Center.
Absolutely. It's one of the major challenges. And if you go down towards the site, you'll see fire units from New Jersey, from Long Island, using all available resources. But policing goes on throughout the city. Fire services are provided. It's 319 square miles, 8 million people. They deserve to get the service, and they are getting it. I think the mayor has made certain of that.
Talk about readiness all the time. How much can a drill, a basic drill without a catastrophe, prepare a force like the New York City Police Force for what they're dealing with right now?
Well, it can give you a practice in the coordination, in communication, that sort of thing, but nothing this size of magnitude was ever envisioned. There have been some drills about the use of chemical and biological agents. They envision a large number of casualties, so they have helped in that regard. But nothing was thought of in this regard.
On a personal note, I know you live down in that area, not far from the building. You haven't been able to get home, and it's going to be awfully strange to look out the window and walk down some of our avenues and not see those towers looming over this city.
Absolutely. No, every day when I walk out the door, I saw the World Trade Center, so it's going to be just a shock, and it's shocking now to look down the avenue and not see it.
Former New York City Police Commissioner Raymond Kelly. Ray, thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Here's Katie.
Matt, thank you very much. Needless to say, thousands of lives have been shattered by these attacks on this country. Annalise Peterson is searching for both her brother and her boyfriend, who worked in different towers at the World Trade Center. She's at St. Vincent's Hospital. Annalise,
hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My heart goes out to you. I know you're absolutely sick with worry and completely frantic. Tell me, first of all, your brother. Tell me where he worked and on what floor.
He worked on the 106th floor of Cantor Fitzgerald, and was a trader on the 106th floor. And I haven't heard anything from, I know that my boyfriend's roommate had talked to someone at Cantor, or someone that had talked to someone on Cantor on the floor right when the first airplane had hit. And he said that they were trying to get out, but they couldn't get down because they had hit underneath them. But they were waiting and they were patient. And then my boyfriend's roommate went ahead and called my boyfriend, who works at Sandler O'Neill, and he works on the 104th floor of the World Trade Tower 2. And he said, you know, Frederick, are you at your desk? And, you know, is Freddie at the desk? And they couldn't see him. And this was after the first plane had hit, and they said we're evacuating right now, but we don't know where Freddie is. And knowing him, he was probably looking, oh, look, there's a plane. And so they all tried to evacuate, and then 3 minutes later, after he hung up, the second plane had hit the second tower.
You obviously, Annalise, have spent the last 24 hours trying to locate both your brother, whose name is Davin, or
Davin Peterson.
Davin Peterson.
Davin Peterson. He's 25 years old and 6'5", so 6'6". So he's a pretty big guy. So if you've seen him at any hospital or around, if he's unconscious or anything, please contact us.
And Annalise, I was going to ask you, what have you done in an effort to find both your brother and your boyfriend, Frederick Cox? Have you visited area hospitals? Where have you been? What have you been doing? Well,
I've been contacting all his family and my family, and then there's a center over here at right by St. Vincent's that consolidates all the lists from all the hospitals, and we keep on going in and check. But right now the line outside of it is so long, it's like for family to get in and check the list every hour is getting pretty difficult. So it's hard because there's no consolidated list or a place that you can go. There's no website, so it's hard to find out information. So you want to go down there and dig out through the rubble, but you don't know what to do. You don't know where, you feel so helpless because there's nothing in your power that you can physically do. You have Annalise, your sister there, who is with you, helping you. So thank goodness you have her as you all look. And I know that we have a number, and I'm not sure if it will be helpful at all. It says the Office of Victims of Crime has established a hotline. Let me give it to you. It's 1-800-331-4646.
0075. Our office can get in touch with you and your sister if you can't remember the number. It says you can leave contact information to get more details about victims and survivors. Both of these guys are young men. How old is your brother?
My brother's 25 and my boyfriend's 27. And if you have any information, I'm under the understanding that some of the people at Sandler O'Neill did get down. I talked to, Sandler O'Neill did set up a hotline as well as Kenner Fitzgerald. We contacted both. And I guess 20 people did get down from his floor. I guess if you had left right after the first plane had hit, you could have gotten down. You had 20 minutes to get down. So if any of those people could contact us and just let me know what was going on, if you knew what Freddie was doing, or if you were working with Kenner Fitzgerald, if you knew what Dowden was doing, if there's any information that you have, just to their whereabouts, their last whereabouts, we'd really appreciate it.
Well, you know, Annalise, what's the best way? I know this is pretty unconventional, but these are very unconventional times.
Yeah.
What is the best way to reach you?
You can call us at our home phone, or you can email
You know
us.
what? Why don't you give it to our producers, and if people have any information
call you guys
then I can
forward on the message.
Then we can pass your phone number along. Annalise, again, we wish you the very best, and our prayers are with you and with your...
Yeah, we were just talking. I was just saying, they said, do you know Katie Couric? And I said, yeah, everybody knows Katie Couric. And we had a conversation about you the other day, Frederick and I, and we were walking up the street. And I said, we walked by ABC, and we said, hey, look, and I said, it's Katie Couric. I once saw her at the Glamour Awards one year, and he's like, who's Katie Couric? And I said, everybody knows who Katie Couric is.
Oh, well, I'm so sorry that we're...
And so we walked up to someone on the street, and we said, now, do you know who Katie Couric is? And he's like, everybody knows who Katie Couric is.
So you made your boyfriend feel very stupid. Annalise, well, listen, I'm so sorry that we're meeting under these circumstances, and again, we're all praying for you that you'll be able to find your brother, who I'm sure you love very much, as well as your boyfriend. And please let us know if there's anything else we can do.
Yeah, and my heart goes out to everybody else as well.
I'm sure. All right, Annalise, thanks again.
Thank you.
Matt.
Katie, bear with me here, because I'm hearing that we're about to talk to a woman named Joyce Carnes, who, from what I've been told, her brother was in the World Trade Center when the collisions or the accidents took place, no accidents, when these terrorist attacks took place. And she is now talking to her brother, or has talked to her brother, on the phone from inside the rubble. Joyce, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, fill me in on this. And again, I apologize for not having more information. Tell me what's going on.
Well, actually, my brother was in Wilton, Connecticut, working at Deludy and Touche as a CPA. And I called him and let him know what happened to the World Trade Center. And he was, in 1993, working there. And after the bombing, they had moved it to the World Finance Center. But recently, he's been transferred to their national department in Wilton, Connecticut. And at 11:40, he told his boss while I was on the phone that he was going military to see what he can do to help.
I'm a little confused.
He was in the Marine Corps for 18 years, and he was going to re-enlist.
Okay, but can you tell me, where's your brother right now?
Right now, he went back in the Rebel to see who else he can find.
So he is at the World Trade Center. He's actually searching through the rubble?
Yes.
And the rescue workers are allowing him to do that, even though he's not a trained...
Well, he called me on his cell phone last night at 7:49. He couldn't find any rescue workers.
Okay, so he went in on his own.
Right, and he found 2 sergeants with the Port Authority.
All right. Well, Joyce, good luck, and if you contact your brother, we'd love to hear more about that. We're going to move on to something else, but we thank you for talking to us. One man who knows firsthand the task that lies ahead for emergency rescue workers at the World Trade Center and also the Pentagon is John Hanson. He was the deputy chief of the Oklahoma City Fire Department in 1995 when Timothy McVeigh bombed the Murrah Federal Building. He's at the Oklahoma City Memorial this morning. Mr. Hanson, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
I can only imagine what went through your mind as you saw the horrifying images of both towers of the World Trade Center collapsing yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. You know, it's deja vu all over again. On this site 6 years ago, as you mentioned, we had a tremendous incident. And now, you know, we had a 9-story building that was involved, Matt, and our friends in New York City are dealing with 2 towers, 110 floors each, and it's just incredible what they're facing.
Yeah, it took more than a week in some cases for you to get through the rubble and find people who were or were not alive, and you can only estimate with 110-story buildings how long it's going to take rescuers to pick through this debris.
Absolutely. It took 17 days working 24 hours a day right here on this site 6 years ago. And now these men and women are facing a month-long, at least, maybe more than that, situation. And then you compound it, as you were talking to the police commissioner, you compound that with over 200 New York City firefighters and public safety officials that have become victims of this, losing their chief, some of the top officials. The same team that the former commissioner spoke of was here in Oklahoma City helping us. You know, we know these men and women that have been involved in this and are missing right now, and our heart certainly goes out to them, and we hope that America will support them as they supported us. I know Oklahoma is certainly standing ready to support our friends in New York, and one thing we've got to realize is it is going to take a long time, so we have to be patient with the rescue workers and give them all the support we can.
It's a very delicate process, John. I want to talk about the fact that there's a similarity in this situation in Oklahoma City in that the floors of the building pancaked. One fell on top of the other. And I remember that during the rescue operations in Oklahoma City, there were many occasions where rescuers had to stop and pull back because they found some instability in that structure.
You know, I think that we heard last night reports coming out of the building that they've already faced those problems, and that's why that a lot of the rescuers couldn't approach different positions in the World Trade Centers. Countless times we had to stop, pull back, reevaluate. You know, if I could characterize it, you know, take a pile of pickup sticks, if you will, and dump them off the ground. Every time you take one out, there's a chance of moving another. It's going to be something that takes a long time. They're going to have to be so careful moving a piece of concrete or a piece of steel, being very cognizant on what's happening on the other side. You know, will our rescue effort cause a secondary structural collapse? So it is going to take time, and we as Americans right now just have to be extremely patient with our rescue workers.
And John, talk about the emotional side of this. Obviously, the family members of those who've lost loved ones in this tragedy are going to need all of our prayers and emotional support. But there's another dynamic here, and these rescuers are going to be seeing some horrific sights. And take me back, if you will, to what happened in Oklahoma City and the toll that some of those images took on the people who were doing the rescuing.
Well, you know, Matt, as you mentioned, that the trauma to the building, we've all seen that on the incredible coverage. Imagine the trauma to some of the people that's going to be in the building. Those are going to be unpleasant sights. As the rescue effort lingers, those sites will increasingly be unpleasant. And psychologically, I know the New York City authorities, Mayor Giuliani, all have incredible systems set up for the emotional well-being of the rescuers. But it is going to be very, very difficult, Matt. And then after the incident, there's going to be a long-term recovery process for all those brave men and women. And one thing you mentioned, the emotional part of the rescuers, the firefighters and police that are working there as we speak. Keep in mind that they're going to be running across, recovering some of the men and women that used to be standing by their side, some of New York's bravest.
So they're going to need some mental counseling, there's no question. If you had any piece of advice, John, for the men and women who are now working so frantically at the World Trade Center, what would it be?
Well, we're just extremely proud of them, Matt, knowing what we faced here, knowing that they were at our side during this event we had right here, and you know, the advice we'd give is that, you know, take it slow. They're the best trained search and rescue team in the country up there. I know Mr. Rawbaugh has sent, I believe it was 12 urban search and rescue teams that were here, and work together, take our time, and let's keep any more of our rescuers from becoming victims.
All right, John Hanson in Oklahoma City this morning. John, thanks very much. Good seeing you.
Thank you, Matt.
All right, now here's Katie.
Matt, thank you. Coping with disaster is difficult for anyone, and so is explaining it to your children. Dominic Capello is the author of 10 Talks Parents Must Have with Their Children About Violence. Good morning.
Good morning.
You know, one of the things, as Matt was talking to John Hanson, that probably these rescue workers need to do is to talk to somebody, or, you know, don't internalize all
Absolutely.
this incredible trauma that they're experiencing as we speak.
Absolutely. I think that, well, first, no one is prepared for this. Emergency workers are not prepared for this. I don't think any parent in America was prepared to go to war the way we did, and so I think every parent is struggling on what's the right thing to do. The first thing to do is to communicate how you're feeling, and a lot of people are feeling very scared. A lot of people are very frightened, and that's something you have to talk about.
Okay, well, let's talk about talking about that with your kids.
Sure.
And I have a 10-year-old, so I have to tell you how close to home, because we had a very difficult night last night, which we'll get to in a moment. But are you saying that parents should be open with their children about how scared they might be? Because I have to say that this was extremely unsettling for me, as it was for so many people across the country. And I'm feeling very vulnerable. But you want to reassure your children, don't you? You don't want to tell them how scared and nervous this all makes you, do you?
Well, I'm glad you brought this up. Our center was getting calls all last night, and a mom called and said, you know, is it okay to tell our kid that we're scared? And they weren't sure. Another mom called and said, is it okay if our kids see us crying? And because parents were around the TV set, and this family in Brooklyn, the dad was scared and the mom was crying, and they felt like it's okay to communicate this as long as the kids know that we're here to protect you. I think kids are looking for some security right now. They don't want their mom and dad to go to work because mom and dad may not come home. They don't want their uncle or grandpa to get in an airplane because they don't know what's going to happen. So kids are looking for security. Parents certainly want to be able to say that, you know, something really bad happened. This doesn't normally happen. But I think it's appropriate for any adult to communicate some fear and some sadness.
How honest should we be? In other words, I struggled with that last night too, how much to tell. My 5-year-old is happily oblivious to most everything, but my 10-year-old is very aware of what goes on around her.
Sure. It depends on the age. It depends on the age of the child.
Should you be honest? Should you say 4 planes were hijacked? Terrorists used them as missiles. They crashed into the World Trade Center. One crashed in the Pentagon. One just crashed. I mean, that's pretty tough stuff.
It's really tough stuff. A mom, I called the Upper West Side and said, what did you do? She goes, well, I decided I would tell my 6-year-old something because I know when he goes to school on the playground, there's going to be talk, there's going to be jokes, and I want him to hear from me. So she decided not to be totally honest, but said something bad happened. There were some bad people. We're going to catch those bad people. A lot of people were hurt. And she understands that this is the beginning of a conversation, Katie. This is not something that you have the talk tonight and it's over. You know, we Americans now have weeks, months, a year to try to find a way to talk about it. It's not easy.
It really isn't. And of course, many children today are feeling extremely vulnerable.
Yes.
And, you know, there's that natural human sense of relief if it wasn't you or your family or your parents or people you knew. You're sort of, whew. But many children are worried, could this happen again? Could this happen to us? And last night my daughter asked me, Mom, are they going to bomb us? Is something going to happen to us? And I said, no, don't worry. You're okay, we're okay. She said, how do you know? I mean, and the question is, how do you know?
Well,
and how can you be honest about that?
And I think this is tough, and this is something every family will struggle with. And I'll be quite candid with you. I work in the field of violence prevention. Something like this, we're not prepared for this. This is a whole new ballgame for those of us who are educators or therapists or community people. I think you're doing what you want to do. You talk to your child, you give them as much love as you can every single day. And
you listen to their concerns and try to address them, and you try not to dismiss them. Isn't that good advice? Because
Absolutely.
You have to at least be open to what frightens them so you can deal with it properly. You can't say, oh, you're being silly, that's ridiculous.
No, and some kids will act out. Some kids will say it's no big deal, or they'll even make jokes on the playground. But you know, all of us, adults and children, have our own way of coping with our emotions and our feelings. And so we're going to have to be very patient, very patient.
But I want to emphasize again, Dominic, that we probably need to tell our children this is a very rare occurrence.
Absolutely.
This is highly unusual. This has never happened before. And the likelihood of happening again is quite slim. Can we safely say that?
You can absolutely say that. It's very slim, and this is also a time for us to think about our own beliefs and our faith, and you know, bring our families and communities together.
It might be a time that if you don't always go to church, to go to church.
Absolutely.
Or
My
go
sister
to
called
a
and said we're all going to church. Actually, they were going to go last night, and they're going back on Sunday. Whatever your faith may be, this might be a very good time to bring the family together.
It might be a good time to bring the school community
Absolutely.
together.
Got a call from a PTA mother in Maryland who said, should we have our PTA meeting tomorrow night and bring parents parents together, that's an excellent idea.
Now, some families are, of course, are not just feeling vulnerable, they're feeling completely shattered because they've either gotten terrible news about someone they love very much, or they have no idea. As we just spoke to that, young, beautiful woman who can't find her brother or her boyfriend, Annalise. I mean, those people need real professional help.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Professional therapists are going to be needed, as well as the clergy. People of faith will be needed for weeks and months to come.
So we need to emphasize that if anybody is in that situation, to please go get some mental health help.
Call for help. This is not a time to be alone. This is a time to be with family and community, and professional help is available.
All right. Well, Dominic Campello, thank you very much. We probably need to have you on in the upcoming days and weeks because this is not going to go away. Thanks very much. Now here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thanks. Ever since yesterday morning, the nation's air traffic system has basically been shut down. We had expected some airports to open at about noon Eastern time today. From what we've heard, that has not happened. We're going to get an update now on what we may expect over the next several hours and even days from Bob Hager, who's in Washington. Bob, what have you been hearing?
Matt, bit by bit, this is dribbling in now. Delta's just put out a statement that they won't try to operate any flight at least until after 6 p.m. tonight, so that includes all Delta regular flights, their commuter lines, and the Delta shuttle as well. Continental has put out a statement saying it will operate only minimum number of flights today, and I think one by one we're going to see all the airlines fall in line here. Midway, meanwhile, which was already struggling and operating, had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, they said they're just going to suspend business completely. In part because they believe that it won't pick up now for quite some time because of passenger resistance, so worrying about terrorism.
We're talking about domestic flights for the most part here. Bob, what about international flights?
That'll be part of the same rule, that nobody's going off until at least after 6 p.m. tonight. Now, I say nobody. These airlines are one by one saying this, Delta and Continental, but I expect other airlines will follow suit, and we're going to see very few operations until after 6 p.m., and then, even then, maybe not much at all. So it'll be another day before things start to resemble normal at all.
And briefly, if you will, Bob, once flights do resume, we're going to be seeing some different and much more strict procedures at airports.
Oh, absolutely. More identification of passengers and no curbside baggage and things as small as, well, small, it could be big. No sale of knives or even plastic knives at the airport shops, as I understand it.
All right. Bob Hager in Washington. Bob, thanks very much. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Really quite staggering, Matt, when you think about all the safety precautions that have already been put in place, in the heels of this, and no wonder the airlines are not open for business yet because they're going to have to make several adjustments and probably even more in the future. And
you'd hope, as you mentioned before, that people don't complain about these extra inconveniences because they are simply being put into effect to protect all of us.
Well, it's been a pretty horrific 24 hours. I think that's safe to say. I don't think there's ever been a news event of this magnitude that you or I have ever covered, certainly. Tom Brokaw will be following all the developments on this attack on America in just a few minutes. As we say goodbye to you on this tragic day, we leave you with the indelible images as they unfolded over the past 24 hours. Families shattered, hearts heavy, people still in disbelief, and many questions still unanswered.
We have a breaking story, though.
Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City. It happened just a few moments ago, apparently. We have very little information available.
It's quite terrifying. I'm in shock right now. It's mind-boggling, and it's horrifying.
A hijacked American Airlines flight out of Boston slams into the North Tower of New York's World Trade Center at approximately 8:42 a.m. Eastern Time.
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision. Can you see it? I can see it on this shot.
A second airplane, a 727, just ran into the building. It's now approximately 9:03 a.m.
Oh, my God! Oh! Forget about the damn car. Let's go!
It felt just a few moments ago like there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon.
9:40 a.m., a third hijacked plane, an American flight out of Washington Dulles, crashes into the Pentagon in a burst of flames.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
The FAA has banned all takeoffs at all airports across America.
We just saw a live picture of what seemed to be a portion of the building falling away from the World Trade Center.
9:59 a.m. The until now unthinkable. The South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses.
Spent a year in combat. Never saw anything like this. Sure, a lot of people died, but nothing this devastating.
The other tower of the World Trade Center has just collapsed.
There's been a declaration of war by terrorists in the United States.
You didn't have time to look at, you just want to be alive, really.
There was smoke everywhere and people were jumping out the windows.
The city of New York in the United States of America is much stronger than any group of barbaric terrorists.
We will find the people responsible for these cowardly acts, and justice will be done.
These are Palestinian celebrations in the wake of Tuesday's terror attacks in the United States. Apparently, Palestinians took to the street chanting, "God is great."
The alleged mastermind, America's most wanted terrorist, Osama bin Laden.
Gotta move back.
Certainly in more than 20 years of covering horrific events, this is something that I've never seen before.
I got hold of a video camera and began recording, some of what had happened.
We're looking at those images right now.
Yeah.
So you're looking through your viewfinder watching the tower collapse.
Yeah, and you can see I'm not very far away. I mean, they see that big chunk of the building, and this cloud starts moving real fast.
We're all crying, hysterical. We were wanting to get out of there and not knowing where to go and which direction to run in and how far we can go. And I'm still worried about my life. Yeah, it's horrifying.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong.
This is wild.
Through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
This is an NBC News special report. Attack on America. Here is Tom Brokaw.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is day 2 of America's war with terrorists, a war against a shadowy and cold-blooded enemy willing to kill anyone to advance their cause. This is the destruction in New York City alone. The twin trade towers of the World Trade Center collapsing completely, trapping thousands of people in the rubble as the rescue efforts continue. They'll go on for an indeterminate length of time. No one knows for sure how many people may be alive. No one can say how many people may in fact be dead, but the numbers are in the thousands. And that's the USS George Washington. It's off the coast of Long Island. It is providing military support and air cover for the eastern seaboard. The president today did in fact use the phrase, "We are at war with these terrorists." What they did to us was a declaration of active war. The most frantic rescue efforts are underway in lower Manhattan, of course, and NBC's David Bloom is in a position to tell us what is going on there now. David?
Well, Tom, this is a haunting, even demoralizing vantage point from which to see the immense destruction and the incredible rescue effort that's going on here in lower Manhattan. We are on Church Street, 6 blocks north of where the World Trade Center used to stand. And if we push in off into the distance, you can see the still smoking hulk of the South Tower, the number 2 tower of the World Trade Center. Tom, it is just an incredible scene here in the sense that you can see the rescue workers who have been here literally since more than some 28 hours now from when this first explosion occurred just around 9 a.m. yesterday. Most of them, if you look down, you can see the rescue workers, firefighters mixed in with police officers, as well as National Guard troops here on the scene. Many of them wearing the masks because the debris and the filter in the air is still spewing up. Having said that, we do know of some small successes that have occurred thus far. To the best of our knowledge, at this hour, 8 individuals have been rescued from the scene. 5 firefighters, 3 police officers since last night, pulled from the rubble alive. You can see, Tom, if we pan down here onto the street, some of the rescue workers coming out. Many of these individuals have been inside just 6 blocks to the south for much of this morning. They come out, they essentially grab a quick bite to eat, grab some water, turn around and go back inside. You might also be able to spot the Humvee with the machine gun on top. As we mentioned, National Guard troops now deployed here in Lower Manhattan, not because there's been any trouble, but really merely to help the police and the firefighters. Of course, it has been a horrific 28 hours. Here's the sequence of events as we put them together thus far. Amidst the devastation, a glimmer of hope. Today, authorities say 5 New York City firefighters and 1 police officer were pulled from the wreckage, in addition to the 2 police officers rescued last night. And there may be others still trapped inside the World Trade Center's collapsed remains. Reports of cell phone calls from a few survivors pleading for help.
We do know there are people in the building that are alive. We know that for a fact. We're very hopeful that there are pockets where there are people, not only the ones that we know about, but hopefully others.
The president today condemns the attacks and vows to punish those responsible.
The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win.
But elsewhere, the news is grim. The president last night puts the death toll from the attacks in the thousands after an estimated 12 to 20 terrorists wielding makeshift knives hijacked 4 domestic airliners. Brand new video obtained overnight shows the first attack plane crashing into the World Trade Center's North Tower. Minutes later, television helicopters record the second plane crashing into the South Tower. The 2 110-story buildings so badly damaged that they collapse, one after the other. Among the missing...
That was the scene yesterday as recounted by David Bloom. There are some late developments. NBC's Pete Williams, who's our Justice Department correspondent, has been talking on the telephone with federal law enforcement officials. They say that some arrests are being made this morning in connection with the terrorist attacks. They're describing these people as material witness warrants. The officials say the arrests are being made when the people decline to answer questions or otherwise cooperate. This is at the Westin Copley Hotel. The FBI bomb squad is inside. That's in Boston. 2 of the flights originated at Logan Airport in the Boston area, obviously. We don't know whether this is in fact just a report of a bomb or if they in fact have found one. It's the Westin Copley Hotel in Boston, and we're going to go to NBC's Andrea Mitchell now, who is in Washington as well. She's been tracking not only the national security matters, but this law enforcement investigation that is going around the world. So Andrea, Pete Williams is reporting that they are now issuing some material witness warrants for arrest in this case.
Exactly. Now, we should stress that these are not in any way necessarily people who are complicit or are involved in the acts of terror. These are material witness warrants for people who may have seen something or may have some other tangential involvement, people who may have perhaps even unwittingly assisted these terrorists along the way. But as you know, the FBI spread out in Florida following up a clue from one of the flight manifests and did an extensive search in Broward County, Florida last night. And we have other reports from other members of the NBC News team. Julie Holstein reporting that in Portland, Maine, a police chief spoke at a press conference this morning, Tom, and said that the FBI had directed his department to focus on 2 men who were on the U.S. air flight that left Maine at 6 a.m. yesterday and that landed at Logan at 6:30 a.m., where, of course, they could have connected to several of the other flights, the 2 other flights. The FBI believes, Tom, that the 2 men spent Monday night in Maine, that they rented a blue Nissan Optima from Alamo car rental in Maine, that they had carry-on bags and had to go through security again at Logan because the plane was in a different concourse. So they are really zeroing in on a number of these players, people on the manifest, and also, as you point out from Pete Williams' note, the FBI now putting out arrest warrants for people who may have been material witnesses.
All right, that's NBC's Andrea Mitchell in Washington. We continue to watch these developments in Boston. The crowd has been pushed back from that hotel, which is in the heart of Boston. Let's listen for just a few moments to our affiliates' coverage there, WHDH Television, Channel 7 in Boston.
And so it's hard to try and figure out how the two connect.
I try to regain contact with Christine McKenna. I'll ask our producers to do that as we talk once again with Garvin Thomas, who's at Copley Plaza right now. Garvin?
Jonathan, I guess it's a very strange scene out here. Obviously, by now, I would say the crowd that is outside here is probably numbering in the thousands of people just on the street alone. I notice a crowd that's gathered across the street in front of the Copley Plaza Hotel as well. Everybody wondering what is going on here, trying to figure out if it has any connection to what happened in New York City yesterday. As I said, the scene is about a half an hour old when the first emergency workers responded to a call here at the Westin Hotel. We've seen quite a response. As I said, I can count 3 ambulances in front. There was a SWAT team which arrived about 15-20 minutes ago. I'd say about a dozen members, fully outfitted in their Kevlar gear and helmets and shields. I think I noticed a battering ram at one point going in. They carried in some cases as well, which I can only speculate might be some materials used to investigate or defuse bombs, or maybe some crime scene investigation tape. They went in about 15 minutes ago. The police have not been too concerned with the safety, it appears, of the people who are outside the area now. It appears they have not evacuated the hotel. As I look up on some of the floors and peer in some of the windows, I noticed some obviously very curious residents of the hotel. As you can see, another ambulance arriving on scene here. The picture you're looking at right now, courtesy of what we call our mass cam. It's located on top.
We're going to continue to monitor the situation in Boston, and we'll go immediately back to it as soon as there are some concrete developments. We want to return to Washington now, and NBC's Andrea Mitchell, as this investigation begins to take up pace. Andrea?
Well, as you know, Tom, what they have been doing for the last 24 hours or 36 hours since all of this developed was to go back over any intelligence, any warnings, any cues that might have been missed, and also to look prospectively. So you have intelligence operatives around the world from all of our agencies working together in Langley at the Counter-Terrorist Center, but also sending out directives to try to warn other terror groups not to think that the U.S. is vulnerable, not to try to make any kind of copycat attempt, not that anyone could, but there are freelancers, there are smaller operations that could try to imitate what has been achieved by these terrorists against the United States. And part of this is to look to see if anyone else is also making threats. Now, part of what they're doing, obviously, is also pursuing the investigation. And as we've been reporting since yesterday, the primary suspect in their light, with a great deal of evidence that is mounting, is the operation and groups associated with Osama bin Laden. They have warned people in the region. They have talked through the Pakistanis, have sent, we're told by briefers who were briefing in Washington today, that a Pakistani military delegation has gone to Kabul to speak to the Taliban leaders and let them know that if there ever were time to avoid retaliation and do something cooperatively with Osama bin Laden, that moment is now. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell. As we continue to watch the situation in Boston, we're beginning to get more names that are being released by the airlines, but the news continues not to be good out of the World Trade Center area, where they continue to search for bodies and for people who may still be alive. There were reports last night that some people were on their cell phones trying to tell searchers where they were at that time. Some better news, however, in Washington today in terms of the death toll at the Pentagon. At one point last night, we were told that as many as 800, mostly military personnel, had been killed when the airliner was driven into the side of the Pentagon yesterday morning, shortly after the attack on the World Trade Center. NBC's Jim Miklashevsky is there for us again today. Jim, what is the latest on the count there?
Well, Tom, according to Pentagon officials, the latest death toll here at the Pentagon appears to be just over 100. Some 40 to 50 Army personnel, both military and civilian. Some 40 to 50 Army or Navy, again, civilian and military, and approximately 7 defense intelligence employees, all civilians, according to officials here in the Pentagon. There was some confusion here yesterday. That entire area that was hit by this airliner yesterday is an area in transition. A lot of people moving into offices, out of offices. And so when everybody scattered, it was difficult to keep track. And it wasn't until this morning, when people started to report back to work, that they actually started to get a much better number on those still missing. And they've narrowed it down to approximately 100 or 107 they hope, anyway, at the maximum. But they say that it will take at least a week before rescue workers and recovery operations can really be concluded in that region, because the area is still so unstable. It's a danger to rescue workers, and because some fires continue to burn there. In fact, a short time ago, Tom, they put out an alert and were ready to evacuate the entire building because a hot spot had occurred in the roof above us, but then they got that contained, and they decided we could stay. But very unstable in that entire section, so it's going to be some time before we get any kind of exact casualty count out of there. But we are told that notification of next of kin has already begun, and perhaps Secretary Rumsfeld himself will talk to us later this afternoon to give us that information. Tom?
All right, thanks, NBC's Jim Miklashevsky. We have on the telephone now our Justice Department correspondent, Pete Williams, who was in the backcountry of the American West when all of this happened. He's now in Denver, and he's been working the telephones. He did report to us that material witness warrants have been issued. They're beginning to pick up people who refuse to cooperate with investigators. Pete, you expect that we're going to see more incidents like the one that we're witnessing right now in Boston?
Yes, Tom. Federal law enforcement officials say we're going to see a lot of this in the coming days. People taken into custody, anyone who has any potential connection with the suspected terrorists, for whom the authorities wish to keep track of, and they may want to ask them additional questions. Anyone who isn't completely cooperative with agents will probably be arrested on material witness warrants. We saw a lot of this similar kind of thing, although certainly not on this scale, in the days and weeks leading up to the millennium, when after the Ahmed Rissam came across the border with a car full of explosives, and immediately the FBI and other law enforcement officials began to try to figure out how extensive this potential terrorist network was. And they were making these material witness warrants all over the country, knocking on doors, going up alleys, into apartments all over the country. And we're going to be seeing this probably on a much bigger scale in the coming days, authorities say. Now, they caution us to say that even as they make these arrests, we shouldn't jump to the conclusion that these people necessarily are connected to the terror plot, that it could be they're simply people who are, for whatever reasons, not being cooperative. And it's possible, they say, that some of these people could ultimately be released if it turns out they have no connection. So they caution us to not jump to any conclusions as we watch these arrests being made.
All right, Pete Williams in Denver, what else can you tell us about the nature of the investigation? Is this going on not just in this country but around the world as well? Are they asking international authorities to cooperate with us?
Absolutely, although obviously the FBI's power to make arrests is considerably different overseas. anyone they wanted to detain, they'd have to get host nation cooperation to do that, and I don't get any indication that they're near that at this point.
But we do have many outposts overseas. That was established under Louis Freeh, who did have this grave concern about an international network of terrorism directed at this country.
That's right. We heard John Ashcroft yesterday afternoon, the Attorney General, use that somewhat unfamiliar term, legats, that the FBI has around the country. That's short for legal attachés, FBI agents assigned to American embassies in major cities around the world. And he already indicated last night that they're very actively going after chasing leads in their cities as well.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Pete Williams. Let's go to Boston now, and one of our crack investigative reporters, Chris Hansen of Dateline NBC. Boston, of course, is ground zero for this investigation because 2 of the planes were taken from there. Chris?
Absolutely, Tom. Good afternoon. The scene that you've been watching at the Copley Plaza Hotel in Boston has been repeated to a lesser degree all over town today. From talking to investigative sources in and around the airport here, FBI agents and state police have been interviewing cab drivers who may or may not have knowledge of the people involved in this. They've been talking to baggage handlers who are familiar with perhaps some of the subjects. And federal investigators are confirming that they do believe that there is an actual terrorist cell here in the Boston area with direct links to Osama bin Laden, and that's part of what's made this such an aggressive investigation today, such a fast-moving investigation today. Officially, FBI agents here are not saying much. They're saying that the word is going to come out of Washington, but we can tell you that there are literally hundreds of investigators here at the airport talking to virtually every human being that had anything to do with the flights that took off and ultimately smashed into the World Trade Center, Tom.
Okay, NBC's Chris Hansen, who is at Logan Airport in Boston. Chris, just tell us, as a matter of other interest, of course, what happened to airport security there today?
Well, airport security is going to increase incredibly here. No longer will there be curbside baggage check-in. They're going to keep all vehicles 300 yards away from any airport building. There will be more ID checks, and only ticketed passengers will be allowed into the secure areas of the airport. There have been some other developments here, Tom, that are interesting. Reports circulating from investigators that perhaps there were 3 people who bought one-way tickets on this flight at the very last minute and boarded like perhaps 11 minutes prior to the flight. As you know, they found this vehicle here today, or rather yesterday, that has been tied to at least 2 of the suspects in the vehicle. They found flight training manuals in Arabic. They have linked this car to 2 brothers who have passports from the United Arab Emirates, and one of them is a trained pilot. They think that they are among those who were the hijackers, and there is every indication now from federal sources that they have pretty much identified all of the hijackers who took part in this on the planes, at least coming from Boston, Tom.
Thank you very much. Dateline's Chris Hansen. Now, our affiliate, WHDH in Boston, has reported that 1 person was wounded in this hotel incident, whatever it was. We just know that there was a massive show of law enforcement there. There was a van parked outside. It has since departed the hotel, but we don't know what went on inside. Again, our affiliate there is saying that they have a report that 1 person was wounded. We'll try to get that sorted out to you. There are names now attached to these hijackings, and 2 of them, Mohammed Atta and Marwan El-Shahi, that's S-H-E-H-H-I, that they took some pilot training when they were in Florida, and the pilot examiner who certified them said his records show that they were certified in November and December of the year 2000. He's still sorting out which man was certified first. They were certified in a Piper Seneca, which is a piston engine. It's a small airplane, obviously. Experienced pilots on this plane say that if you do not have to land or take off a Boeing 757 or a 767, you would likely be able to fly one of those jets after being certified in the Piper Seneca. Once those big airliners are airborne, it is not all that difficult to maneuver them, and obviously the terrorists were at the control yesterday, at the controls of those 2 planes that flew into the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon, and we don't know what happened to the plane that went down just outside of Philadelphia. Let's go to NBC's Ann Curry now, who is in Lower Manhattan, where the search and rescue efforts continue underway. Ann?
As you know, Tom, it is an intense search and rescue effort. I've been down here all morning, and earlier we were taken down to Ground Zero right at Vesey and West, which is just right in front of the World Trade Center building number 1. And we saw the collateral damage is intense. Number 1, building number 1 is just a couple stories, maybe even just 1 or 2 stories still standing, and behind it you can see the wreckage of building number 2. Off to the side, building number 7, as you know, is down. It was still smoking as of early this morning, and there is still some smoke coming out of it, although some of that may be simply smoldering smoke. It's gone on and off again, the fire there. And then also, we should probably tell you from having been on the scene that the collateral damage is intense. The Customs building, which is building number 6, has been severely impacted. There are buildings all around that have been severely impacted. In fact, one nearby building had a gaping hole about 3 stories high. Also, windows blown out a block and a half away. So there's been a lot of intense damage down here. Also, we should probably tell you that the rescuers are searching, doing the best they can in finding everybody. They brought in cranes, all kinds of heavy equipment. In addition, however, they also have robotics. Robot machines. We hear some planes going overhead. I know they're police helicopters. That sounded like a military jet, military jets have been flying over this area, by the way, and the National Guard is on the scene. We've seen robotic machines that they're sending in. They brought them in this morning. They go down. They're able to go where there's so much structural damage, so much structural instability that they feel this is the only safe way to look for people who might still be alive. So what they're doing is they're sending these machines down, and these machines can send back not only images, but they can also send back information as to whether there is movement. They've also brought in infrared devices so that they can tell whether there is heat underneath the rubble. But it's a very, very intense job for them to find people who are still alive using infrared, because there's also some hot spots, as you can see. We should also tell you that this morning we have confirmed from New York Fire Department Chief, Battalion Chief Kevin Burns, confirmed to us that there was one person who was rescued this morning. He would not identify that person, whether it was a man or a woman, a rescuer or a person who was in the building, but he said that person is in the hospital and alive. And one more bit of information for you. We did also see a truck loaded with gas tanks being brought in, and when we asked what those were for, we were told that while the primary focus out here is to find people who may still be alive under this rubble, they are also efforting an attempt to find those black boxes, which were aboard, of course, both of those 2 planes that went down. They brought in the gas tank so they can fuel the device that they need to use to cut through metal. They may be separating the people who need to find those black boxes from the devices themselves. So there is a very intense effort. We have since this morning been pushed back from Ground Zero, and so we're attempting to show you those pictures from above buildings and talking to whoever we can to get you more information. Tom, back to you.
All right, thanks very much. Ann Curry of NBC's Today program on duty and in the middle of it all in Lower Manhattan today, reporting on the continuing search and rescue effort that is underway there. WHDH, our affiliate in Boston. Let's listen to them for just a few moments. We did see that incident at the hotel there. They're now saying that someone has been arrested.
As anybody else is, the few staff members who I talked to, not officials for the hotel, but the people who are just giving out information as they get it, are just saying they're under the impression that police and FBI agents are here. They've been told because there could be something that's connected to the terrorist activity of the last 36 hours or so, and that they just want to see that through. But no. Nobody I've talked to has had any information that there's been any specific purpose for all of these EMS and ambulances to be standing by.
Christina, we are getting some information from our colleague at NBC, Pete Williams, who is fairly well connected, that in fact authorities are looking for, quote, potential connections to terrorists there at the Westin, that they're looking for material witnesses, and that it is one of many operations to come. However, considering the fact that apparently we do have one person injured and is about to be transported, and one person reportedly in custody, and I caution our audience that with any type of breaking news like this, with unofficial information and sometimes hearsay, we have to take all of this a bit with a grain of salt. But clearly, there's quite a bit unfolding here at the Westin right now.
Because we do have some conflicting scenes here with Christina inside the hotel.
That is an unconfirmed report that there's been an arrest at the Westin Hotel, the Copley Hotel, which is in the heart of Boston. Logan Airport was the takeoff site, obviously, for two of the airliners that were used in yesterday's terrorist attacks, and they have identified people who went from Portland, Maine to Logan and boarded those two airplanes, and in fact, two of the men, it appears, did receive some kind of pilot training in Florida last year, in the fall of last year. Here's an intriguing development. We have in Asia, Reti Santra in Singapore. She works for CNBC. She simply dialed the foreign ministry in Kabul and asked if Osama bin Laden is still in Afghanistan. And the Taliban official said that she talked to, yes, he is. I can confirm that because I have seen him. But then he wouldn't answer further questions, saying that she would have to talk with the foreign minister himself. But she did say that he did say that Osama bin Laden is in Afghanistan. There is a Pakistani military delegation en route to Afghanistan right now, apparently with a very stern message to the Taliban, that radical and very fundamentalist Islamic group that has taken over that country and is widely believed to be harboring Osama bin Laden, the man that most people think is the chief suspect in this terrorist war that has been declared on the United States. One of America's leading journalistic authorities on that part of the world is at Newsweek magazine now. He is the Middle Eastern regional editor, an old friend of mine, Chris Dickey. We spent a fair amount of time in that part of the world, but Chris, the equation has certainly changed in the last 24 hours or so.
Nobody ever imagined anything like this. I think that's one of the great problems. The terrorists were a lot more imaginative than the people who were defending the country.
What do we know about Osama bin Laden's operation, the sophistication of it? Yesterday's very complex and, I dare say, in the darkest sense of the word, brilliantly executed terrorist attack against this country shows that he has a very wide reach.
Yeah, I think the thing that you have to recognize about yesterday's operation is the reason it worked was really what the intelligence people called tradecraft, not technology. The technology was minimal, almost non-existent, razor blades, small knives. What made this operation a success from the terrorist point of view was intelligence gathering, surveillance, making a lot of very good judgments about where vulnerabilities were that security officials were not paying much attention to, and then exploiting those to the max. And that's why we had such a disaster yesterday.
Chris, what about the reaction of the other Arab states? King Abdullah of Jordan has been on the air today saying that he condemned those small-scale celebrations in Palestine on the West Bank by the young Palestinians that upset so many Americans. But the rest of the Arab world, by and large, has been reasonably muted during all of this.
Well, I think that you have to look at differences of opinion in the Arab world. A lot of Arabs resent American support for Israel. There's no doubt about that. But they also love America, and they love Americans. I think that a lot of the initial reaction was a reaction to the striking against the symbols of American power. But I think very quickly most Arabs, the vast majority of Arabs, decided that they really could not bear the idea of so many people being killed, so many innocents being killed. I think the reaction is going to be more and more emotional and more pro-American, in fact, in the Arab world.
All right, thank you very much. Chris Dickey, who is the regional editor in the Middle East for Newsweek magazine. Thanks for sharing that with us, and we'll probably be talking to you again during the course of the next several days or so. Let's go back up to Boston now, and Dateline's Chris Hansen, who is there. There are any number of reports of some arrest or something going on in that city as law enforcement officers fan out across Boston, the home of Logan Airport, which was where two of those airliners were hijacked shortly after takeoff yesterday. Chris?
Well, as you probably know, Tom, there are a lot of connections in this area to Osama bin Laden. As we mentioned before, investigators believe that there is a true terrorist cell here with connections. But there are also just a lot of other people in the community that the investigators want to talk to see if they have any knowledge of what was going on here. These things are never carried out by a handful of people. It takes a lot of people to get something like this off the ground. And I'll give you an example of some of the things that they're pursuing today. There are a number of cab drivers who investigators think have knowledge of perhaps what was going to take place here, as well as a number of potential airport employees. And one of the questions here is that apparently there was there were a number of airport identification badges missing, perhaps as many as 800 over the last year. Investigators want to know what happened to these, who used them, and if that played any role into the tragic occurrence that we saw yesterday.
And Chris, there's that one intriguing report as well that when two of the men who are believed to have been part of this hijacking gang arrived at Logan Airport, they got into an argument with someone in the parking lot, and that man later called authorities when he heard two of the planes had been hijacked. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I sure do, Tom, and it's interesting because it seems like any time we get involved in one of these terrorist investigations, one of the key elements of the investigation here is a vehicle. We've seen it over and over again, and again, that's what got investigators going here. There was a guy who got in a scuffle with two men whom he simply described as being of Arabic background. He got on the plane, didn't think anything more of it. He got to his destination, and like all of us yesterday, he looked up at the television monitor and said, "Oh my God," and he heard that these planes came from Boston. He called authorities here and said, "Look, I got into it with these guys. This is the car. This is where it parked." They went there. That's where they found these flight manuals in Arabic. They traced that car to these two men, and you know, were able to pretty much figure out that they were key players in this terrorist attack.
All right, Chris Hansen at Logan Airport in Boston for us. Let's go back to Pete Williams now, our Justice Department correspondent. Pete?
Well, Tom, a couple of things. First of all, just to follow up on what Chris Hansen said, federal law enforcement officials say the discovery of that car, the follow-up on evidence that was in it, they say, quote, looks very promising. So obviously, that is the biggest break so far in this case. They also tell us, and this may seem obvious at this point, but it just has to be said, that what is happening at that hotel in Boston is definitely related to the terrorism investigation. So it's certainly that we're watching. Now, in terms of why they're there, officials caution us that they're going to be doing this a lot in the coming days, serving what are called material witness warrants, which are used when you have reason to want to hold someone for questioning. You don't want them to flee. You have reason to believe that they have information that would be useful to investigators, but you don't have evidence that they were involved in the crime. That, they tell us, is what we're going to be seeing a lot of in the next few days, as indeed we saw right before the millennium last time when there were reports of terrorism plots all over the U.S., these material witnesses warrants being served by the dozens around the U.S., and I'm sure we'll be seeing that in the next few days, Tom.
All right, Pete Williams, we'll let you go back to working the phones at the Justice Department and your law enforcement contacts as this investigation goes on. There have been some, I think, fair to say that there have been some ugly incidents developing around this country directed at Arab Americans. Mosques have been defaced. We're told that online chat rooms now have condemned all Arabs. We have to remind everyone that there are more than 7 million Arab Americans in this country of Islamic faith, and they are not terrorists. These are people of strong faith who are law-abiding American citizens. And in fact, in the Middle East and many of those Arab nations that we have been talking about, there are moderate leaders, including King Abdullah today of Jordan, who condemned this attack and condemned those small celebrations that took place on the West Bank yesterday. I'm joined now by former Secretary of State James Baker. Mr. Baker, we are talking about the place of moderate Arabs in American life, not just those who live here, but those in the Middle East as well. You're very familiar with that part of the world. That's going to be a tricky piece for America in the coming days.
Yes, it is, Tom. I think it's always important to remember when we talk about Islamic fundamentalism that there are an awful lot of fundamentalist Muslims who are very, very good friends of the United States, many of them American citizens, but also citizens of other friendly countries like Saudi Arabia and Jordan and the Gulf countries and other countries. So when we condemn fundamentalists, we really should make it clear we're talking only about radical Islamic fundamentalists.
You have served in the White House as Secretary of State and as Treasury Secretary during times of great crises when as it now appears, this death toll begins to go very, very high. No question there will be a real sense of rage in this country. That, too, will require some very skillful political leadership across party lines in Washington and across America.
I think that all Americans are really going to unite behind the president. We've already seen that. There's not going to be any political partisanship at a time like this. And I really believe that that there's going to be great sentiment on the part of the large majority of the American people to hit back and to do so as effectively as possible. And in that regard, Tom, I might say that when the first President Bush decided he was going to eject Iraq from Kuwait, we were successful in bringing the international community together behind that effort. We had Arab states, indeed, that were members of the international coalition. Most Arab states today, even some that in the past have sponsored state terrorism, have condemned this action and expressed a sense of condolence. And I really hope and believe that we will give some thought to building an international coalition to deal with this problem, because this was more than an assault on America. This was an assault on freedom-loving peoples everywhere, and it is something that I think we might be successful in building a coalition to defeat, first through economic and political sanctions, then perhaps through military means once we've pinpointed responsibility.
What is the instrument for doing that? Does the United States lead that with its NATO partners and other partners as they pick them up?
No, I think that the instrument for doing that, as it was in the Gulf War, would be the United States' superior military technology and ability. It's not going to be easy. You don't want to just blow holes in the desert. That's been one of the frustrations in the past dealing with terrorists. When U.S. citizens were taken hostage in Lebanon and we were in office, we never had many good choices, because yes, we could hit them with missiles or airstrikes and that sort of thing. But by the time you do that, the terrorist action's taken place, the terrorists have fled, and you're just blowing holes in the desert. That's not a very good idea. I was very pleased to hear last night when President Bush said we're not only going to hold responsible the people who actually did this and organized it, we're going to hold responsible those countries and peoples who harbor those people. And to my way of thinking, it wouldn't be a bad idea if indeed it turns out that Osama bin Laden was behind this. It wouldn't be a bad idea, in my view, to pick up the phone and call Kabul and say, okay, we want him in 48 hours, or we want him in a week, or whatever time period you put on it. That was successful. We set a deadline in the Gulf War. It worked. I would think we might want to give some consideration to doing the same thing today.
All right. Thank you very much, former Secretary of State James Baker, who has been a wise counsel to a number of presidents with a very thoughtful and at the same time provocative suggestion that we simply pick up the phone, call Kabul, and say we want Osama bin Laden, if he is identified as the ringleader and mastermind behind all this, in 48 hours, or else, because as the president warned, any country that harbored these terrorists would suffer punishment as well. One of our staffers at CNBC in Singapore dialed the foreign ministry in Kabul not so long ago, just today, and was told by a spokesperson there, yes, Osama bin Laden is in Afghanistan. That spokesperson saying, I have seen him. When and where, we cannot say, of course. NBC's Rahema Ellis is in Lower Manhattan, as she was all day yesterday and at Ground Zero last night. Rahema, the news does not get much better from there.
No, Tom, indeed it does not, but the hope continues here. I'm in an area right now, and from this point down, the effort here is focused on recovery and saving lives. Ironically, some of the rescuers have been in need of being rescued themselves. Hundreds of them, we are told, firefighters fear that hundreds of their own may be trapped inside the tangled debris, because those firefighters were in the area when some parts of the World Trade Center came crashing down. And in the midst of what seems like and looks like an impossible task, there have been reasons to hope. 2 Port Authority workers were pulled from the rubble last night alive, and early this morning, 5 firefighters were pulled from the debris and 1 was conscious. We don't know the conditions of those men at this hour. Hundreds of firefighters are literally working around the clock. I've been here all night long and watched them as they came through the area. Listen to what one firefighter from Staten Island told me about why he is here.
Did you want to come? Oh, of course, everybody does. Just to help. Civilians in there, volunteers, a lot of people helping. Everybody's doing their part. We're going to need everybody because it's going to take a long time.
They are literally working around the clock. And I said to some of these rescue workers, how is it that you keep going? They said they are fatigued, but they are running on adrenaline. I also asked them, how can you prepare for something like this? One firefighter said to me, there's no way to prepare for it. You just come to this area and do the best that you can. Again, literally hundreds of firefighters from as far away as Rhode Island and across to Pennsylvania and everywhere in between have come here with a commitment to see this task through to the end. Although, as many of them have said to me, they have no idea, Tom, as to when they'll be going home.
All right, Rahima Ellis in Lower Manhattan, where the search and rescue effort continues, people volunteering. They're having a hard time getting a lot of those firemen and emergency rescue workers, in fact, to go off shift to get some rest and to get some food and to come back at another time. This will be going on not just for the next 24 hours, but for the next several days. We're joined now by General Norman Schwarzkopf, who is the commander of the Allied forces in Operation Desert Storm. We just heard your old colleague, James Baker, the former Secretary of State, say that what we ought to do, if it is in fact Osama bin Laden, is pick up the phone, call Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, say to the Taliban officials, we want him in 48 hours or else. Think that's a good idea?
Not a bad idea if we know he's there. That's the secret. We've got to know he's there before we can do something like that. What I thought was very important, what Jim Baker said, though, was about our other friends in the area. I've got to tell you that I knew Prince Abdullah very, very well, and I consider him a very good friend of our country. I worked with the Pakistanis a great deal during the time of the Afghan resistance against the Soviet Union. And I will tell you, I have some very, very dear friends in the United Arab Emirates, beginning with Sheikh Zayed and his son, Prince Mohammed, who are truly good friends of ours. So we have to be very careful that we just don't condemn every Arab or condemn everyone who practices Islam. That's really an important thing.
General Schwarzkopf, I think a lot of Americans are puzzled why they don't hear more support from the United States from, for example, Kuwait, which was liberated by the United States, or from our friends in Saudi Arabia, which had its fanny saved by the United States during Operation Desert Storm, or from some of the other moderate Arab states that in fact have relied on American military aid and economic aid, for that matter, principally including Egypt.
Well, many of those countries are on very shaky legs. They are walking that tightrope between supporting Islam, supporting their religion, which of course they will always do. Got to remember, the king of Saudi Arabia calls himself the keeper of the two holy mosques of Mecca and Medina. He doesn't call himself the king. And also the fact that many of these countries have indirectly financed all of the operations against Israel, even when they are violently pro